Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devview.com. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to manipulate and display dates. So how to add values and subtract values from dates. Date math can play with your head. How to display different parts of a date, or how to use some of the built-in features in Visual Basic and the .NET Framework class library to display dates in various formats. We'll also look at how to work with spans of time, so 3 years, 5 years, 1,000 days, whatever the case might be, and subtract and add values to those, and a lot more. So this will be fun. You'll need to work with dates for the same reason you'll need to work with strings. In business applications, dates are pretty used frequently for things like project management, for content management systems, for order management systems, and so on. So we've learned how to work with a string and an integer, and we've learned how to work with a Boolean. Now we're going to add a new data type that allows us to work with dates and times, and then later a new data type that allows us to work with spans of time. So we'll start off by working with dates. So here we're going to go dim my value as date, and if we were to just work with the date by itself, I think it's important for you to see this right off the bat. Let's go ahead and just write out the value, the default value of a date, and see what we get. Because at this point, we've not initialized the date. So it's the equivalent of an empty string or the value of 0 for an integer, which is the initial value, and that's generally not what we want to work with. But I want to show you what you'll see if you were to work with an empty date. It'll give you some representation of a date. It just might not be what you want. All right, so let's go ahead and run the application. And so it's going to give us January 1st, 81 at midnight. Okay, so that's probably not the value we want to work with unless we want to see how many minutes, days, and seconds since January 1st, 1 AD at midnight. Instead, what we'll want to do is initialize that value either to a specific date in the past or future, or if we want to work with now, there's a special function in Visual Basic that allows us to work with this moment as the application is running. It's called the now function. So now whenever we run the application, we'll see that I'm recording this on May 24th at 10:35 a.m. All right, so what if we want to format that date for display? Well, there's a couple of different ways, a couple of different built-in features of dates that will allow us to format it for display, featuring different portions or representations of dates. So let's go my value dot to, and you can see there's just a bunch of these to methods. So to local time, to long date string. Let's use that one first. To long date string. Then we'll go console dot writeline my value dot to short date string. Let's do the same with times. Console dot writeline my value to long time string, and then you're going to see that there's not much of a difference between the two, but I wanted to, for the sake of completeness, show you the to short time string as well. And let's go ahead and run the application. We should see 5 representations of now on screen. So again, this is without the default format. If we print it off, we'll just get the date and the time and the AM PM portion. The long, here let's compare these and put them right next to each other here. So the long date string will give us Tuesday, May 24, 2016, nicely formatted. And again, this will depend on the culture of your computer. So if you are in Europe or if you're in some other country, you might see the default representation of the date different than what you see on my computer, which is set to the culture being English United States. And this is a common way that we would represent dates. So here on the short date string, we just see the month, day, year. Again, you might see day, month, year, which is common in Europe and other countries. Then the time, the long time and the short time, pretty much the same. The only difference is that with the long time, we see the seconds, not just hours and minutes, and then AM or PM. And there's different ways that we can represent if we want something a little bit more custom. So for example, we can just pull off a specific portion of the date. In this case, my value dot month and I'll use ampersand and then 2 dashes and then my value dot year. And so we can grab off just about any portion, even minute, milliseconds. We can pull off the time of day. We can pull off day of week, for example, day of week, day of the year, whether or not this is daylight savings time or not that we're currently in, the time of day, and so on. So I'm just going to pull off day of week just so you can see this, and we'll run the application. And you can see that the day of week is 2. This starts with Monday as the first day. I think Sunday as the 0th day. So just 0 based, I believe. But 5 would be the month, and then the day of the week would be the second item, or the second index, which should be the third item, I think. Okay, but what if I wanted to print something off a little more friendly than that? For example, what if I wanted to do the my value, and I wanted to see, for example, the actual the friendly month, like this is May when I'm recording this. So what I can do is call toString, toString, and then I can use a special formatting provider. And so in this case, I know that I can just use 4 capital M's in a row in order to grab off just the month and print that to screen. So you can see here, this will print off just the month of May. And for more information about that, there's this page you'll want to go search for online, custom date and time format strings. Search for this, custom date and time format strings, on msdn.microsoft.com. So just go to bing.com, type that in, and then it should get you to this page. And you'll see that there's all these different formats that we can use to pull off. Just, for example, D, lowercase d, would give us just 1 through 31. Day of the month would give us 01 through 31. So that's not all that helpful, but we can pull off the HH, for example, giving us a 12-hour clock, or capital H to give us a military clock. Okay, so you can see examples here. I use the 4 M's to give us, you know, the full name of the month, or we can use 3 M's to grab a abbreviated. For December would be DEC. For March it would be MAR, and so on. And here we can grab off the different years and different formatters for strings by just using toString and then passing in the formatter that we want to use. All right, so I just wanted to make you aware of that for reference. Now, I said earlier that we can also do some date manipulation by adding and subtracting days and hours and just about anything from our date. So here we go, console.writeLine, and here we're going to take my value and I'm going to add, and notice that I can add lots of different things to it. I can add a time span, which we'll talk about time spans a little bit. But more importantly, let's like add days or hours or milliseconds or minutes or months or seconds or even years to the current day. So if I say, hey, I want to add 3 days, I'm saying what will be 3 days from now? So I'll go add days, 3, and then I'm going to chain together another method. Now remember what I said about chaining previously. Here we have a date. I'm going to call the add days method to add 3 days onto the current date. And notice that it returns back to me. In IntelliSense, you can see that it returns another date to me. So since it returns a date, I can call another method on the date, and I can do something like toShort date string, like so. And now I'm going to say 3 days from now would be the 27th, right? So today is the 24th, 3 days from now is the 27th, and I print that out to screen. Let's go ahead and comment that out too. And like I showed you a moment ago, we can do lots of really interesting things here. My value dot add hours. So 3 hours from now toShort time string. And that'll say 3 hours from now would be 1:42 p.m. That's accurate. What if I wanted to subtract days? Is there a subtract method? No, there's not. But what you would simply do is just use a negative number. So in this case, I'm just going to subtract 3 days. So 3 days ago to short date string. 3 days ago would be the 21st of March. Okay? So we can just use a negative number inside there. Now, earlier I said that while we can create a date in the past, or I'm sorry, a current date, we can also generate a date for the past or the future by initializing its value like so. There's a couple of different ways to go about this. So let's take my birth date, for example, as new date. And notice that inside of the new date, there is an overloaded, what's called the overloaded constructor. And I'll explain when we talk about classes and creating new instances of classes really soon here in the next couple of lessons. This will make more sense to you, but essentially we can call a method at the time when we create a new instance of a given class, and we can pass parameters in to initialize the state of that new object. Again, this will make more sense later, but just know that I can go ahead and provide, for example, some information as I'm creating a date. In this case, I can provide the year, the month, and the day to initialize an instance of date. So 1969 will be the year, the month will be 12 for December, and the day will be 7. All right, so this now I've created a new birth date, and let's just go ahead and console.writeline this my birth date and see it represented here in our window. 12/7/69. Again, the United States version of this would be December 7, 1969 at midnight. Why midnight? Because we didn't specify a time. But we could do that as well by saying, I think I was born, let's see, do we even have a version of this that would allow me to pass in an hour? Yeah, I think I was born like 7 in the morning. So let's go like 7:30 in the morning, even down to the second. Let's go 1. All right, so now we've given more information as we've initialized our new date to the past, December 7, 1969 at like 7:30 in the morning. Okay. Now, what can we do with this? Well, we can do anything that we did previously with it. We can actually use it to find out the span of time, how many days I've been alive, so on. We'll come back to that in a moment. But this is one way that we can create a new date in the past or the future by initializing it in the constructor. We can also do something like this, where we create my birth date as new date, but we don't have to initialize it right away. We can instead set my birth date equal to, and I can use a string, pass in a string of the date representation using this parse method. So almost every data type, including integer and so on, they all have this parse, and they also have something called try parse, which we'll talk about later. And parse will take some string and say, I'll try to make this into a date if I possibly can. So I'm going to give it some random string. In this case, I'm going to try to make sure that it lines up with an actual date. And hopefully the parse method is smart enough to take that string and convert it into a date and assign it then to the my birthday variable, in which case we do get it to work again here. So that's another way that we can create a new instance of a date in the past or in the future. And then the final way is to use some to create a literal date. Now, in the past, we've created literal strings, right? By using double quotes around a string. So I could create a string called 1969, or December 7, 1969, but notice that this isn't going to work. Let me see if it works. It works only because Visual Basic does it is very forgiving, like I said before. It will do conversions for you if it thinks it can. Okay, it's very clever in that way. We shouldn't rely on Visual Basic's functionality to do this. Instead, what I'd like to do is use the actual literal characters for a date, and instead of using double quotes, you would use pound symbols around a date, and that would make it into a real date. So we would get that. All right, but yes, we don't even have to use date dot parse with the string. We could just give it a string, and Visual Basic's smart enough to figure it out. But do not rely on that. It's called evil type coercion. Evil because it can get you into some problems. You should always be very deliberate about how you work with types in Visual Basic. Even though it forgives you, it can lead to problems if you're not very deliberate. Okay, so always use the correct verbiage and don't rely on Visual Basic shortcuts would be my recommendation. All right, so let's get back to what we were working with originally here and create, again, dim right? And now what if I wanted to work with a span of time? And so we're not working with hours, minutes, seconds. We're working with, at least in form of a date, we're working with it in terms of how long something took or how long something will take. So if I have my birth date, then I can also calculate my age as time span. So here's a new data type that represents a span of time, not a date, but the time between two dates. So in order to figure that out, my age, I'll take date.now. And since now returns a date, we already know that what the now function does, we'll go date.now.subtract, and then I'll pass in my birth date. And that should give me a span of time for how long I've been alive. Now what I can do is go my age dot and see how many seconds I've been alive, how many minutes I've been alive, how many hours, how many seconds, and so on. So let's look for the total number of days that I've been alive. And it'll come back with a very large number, 16,970.45 days. So whenever I run this, the number always gets larger every time I record the series, and I always feel a little bit older. So at any rate, that's how we would figure out then to use a span of time. And we can do that by giving it two dates. In this case, I'm taking the current date and subtracting off another date to figure out that length of time. Okay. And at that point, then I can take my age and say, 10 days from now. So let's add a span of time. So new time span, and we'll say, hey, let's give it the number of hours, minutes, and seconds, or the number of days, and so on. So let's give it in 100 days. Whoops. 100 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. How old will I be? I'll be, here, let's set my age equal to my age.add, and then run it. 17,070 days old. Okay, so we just added on 100 days. Okay, so that's how you manipulate dates and spans of time, as well as manipulating times, printing out various portions of dates and times, and hopefully that'll give you all the tools. Again, my advice regarding dates and times and spans are the same as my advice with strings, which is if you're doing a lot of work to try to figure out how to manipulate a date time or a time span, you're probably doing it wrong. There are so many built-in functions, and we haven't even looked at them all, that are available from the .NET Framework class library or that are baked right into the date data type or the time span data type. Just do a little research online and search for the exact problem you're trying to solve, and chances are there are existing functions that will take care of the majority of it so that you're not writing so much custom code. All right, so you're doing great. We've made it so far through, and I would really say that at this point we've hit the halfway mark, because up to this point we haven't done anything all that complex. Things are going to start getting interesting now as we move on and talk about classes, and this is always sort of a big hurdle for people conceptually. The syntax of classes is easy. It's just the conceptual nature of it. So don't get discouraged. Everybody has this little hurdle, and I'll try to do my best to explain it in a way that's understandable. Just take it in stride and understand it in the context of how the .NET Framework class library was built. And if you understand it in those terms first, then everything else will work and make sense for you. And that's all you really need to know at this point in your journey towards Visual Basic Mastery. Okay, so at any rate, this kind of concludes the first half of the course. What comes next is a little bit tougher. Don't worry. If you got this far, you definitely can do it. You have the power to stick to it, and I'll do my best to help out. We'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks.